Good afternoon, and welcome to the D&H Canal Historical Society's Sunday afternoon with our historian. I'm very excited about today's topic. Well, I should be, I picked it. Maps. I love maps. You can see that my talented camera person, Kelly, my wife, started in on my tie. This is a tie that's got maps on it, which is why I wore it today. This is actually a wonderful gift from my close and dear friends, the very talented composer and playwright Polly Penn, and her partner, the equally as talented Susan Blomhart, who you would know as Mr. Kaplan, you TV fans, from The Blacklist.
Why?
But this was a wonderful birthday gift and seemed apropos because I want to talk about maps. Do we have a question already? That would be exciting.
Not yet.
There you go. So maps. Maps are a wonderful source of information, and the maps that we're going to see today are virtually all 20th century, or excuse me, all 19th century maps. These are a primary source. We historians love primary sources. They're gold. Primary sources are the things that tell you what actually happened at the time. And so we have here, and this actually has got a story as well. This is a map of Orange and Rockland counties. These big school maps were very popular in the 19th century. This one was from 1859. This was actually another dear friend, Charlie Williams, who's a map maker, as a retired map maker from the New York Times, and he's actually creating a map for our kiosk at our park, Grady Park here in High Falls. But Charlie got this, and we purchased it from him at a greatly reduced price. So here we've got this huge map, and the funny thing is that all of the D&H Canal never made it to Rockland. The Shawangunk Mountains are in the way there. All of the D&H Canal in Orange County was in the town of Deer Park. And here we have it, which of course contained the town Port Jervis, named for John Jervis, the second chief engineer of the D&H Canal Company. It was named, I believe, June of 1827, if memory serves. But these maps tell us things. These maps have got stories to tell. They tell us who was where. So if we start up here in Orange, we can see, I'm not going to touch the map. There's a famous story of a Mapamunda in England where there's all these spots that are worn because people want to go and touch where they live. And in fact, I'm going to do, I won't touch it, but I am going to show you where I live on our next map. But along in here, we get to see the line of the canal coming into Cutterbackville. And you'll see the names of some Cuttybacks. In fact, the lore has it that Mr. Cuttyback told William Wirtz that this was the spot he ought to run the D&H Canal. The town of Cutterbackville is named for him. During the final enlargement, there was a Cutterback who was constantly suing them. So it's funny that there's a lot of those stories too. We have, if we look carefully, here's Mr. Comfort's land. And Comfort's Basin is in the stretch in Orange County that was until recently fully watered. And there's a bunch of history buffs that are trying to wet the canal. They want to get water back in. Orange County, you've got a wonderful resource here. You own this. You should fix this. We can help. We'll be working on it at any rate. I also want to do a shout out. I don't know if she's here, but she may. Here's one of the Gumars. And in fact, P.E. Gumar was by one of the locks. I forget the number. I'm sure Judy would remember. And he actually ran a little a saloon, I guess you call it. Oh wow, we're losing our thing here. Sorry, folks, but the gimbal decided it didn't want to see us. I don't know what we're going to do. It's working again. Oh, technology. You realize, of course, we're rather new to this whole thing, right? All right, well, enough of this map. Let's go on to my county, Ulster County. And here the Ulster County map. So it's really wonderful, these maps. This map is from 1858. Earlier, and this is French's. I'm not sure of French's. There were 2 or 3 companies. Brinks did them. 2 or 3 different companies that produced these maps. But this is wonderful. We've got Eddyville right here, which was on the run of the canal. The D&H, they tried to rename Eddyville for John Bolton. He was not a very liked fellow. I'm gonna have to learn.
Bear with.
Yes.
People.
I don't know why it's deciding to give up every once in a while.
Yeah,
maybe it's too much weight on the top. We're trying to avoid the.
All right. Anyways, we're doing our best.
We're working on this. I promise. At least we actually started on the right page today. I'm proud of that. Wonderful little call out to various towns. Port Bend, named for Benjamin Depew, was on the D&H Canal. Eddyville, certainly. High Falls, the town where I'm broadcasting from right now. Is that still doing that to you?
No, I'm
Yeah,
just.
yeah. Now you're worried, right? But here it is. We can follow the line of the canal from Kingston, New York. Actually, right here is the Rondout Creek. Follows through to Rosendale, here into Marbletown. And let's see, I don't want to touch it, but right here, where are we now? J. Merritt. Kelly and I live at J. Merritt's house. And I've seen this name on this map and on a map, the 1872 Beers Directory. But J. Merritt, boy, John Merritt, Jack Merritt, Jimmy Merritt. I mean, there's so many possibilities. I really had a hard time figuring out who J. Merritt was. I'm gonna circle back on that in a minute. Let's just take a little more. Look at this map. All along, there's the name of the property owners, and everybody. Port Jackson. It's my contention. So a lot of these towns, Port Orange was named for Orange County. Port Jervis was named for John Jervis. I think Port Jackson was named for Andrew Jackson, the first populous president of the United States. The time period is exactly correct for it. And this is a surmise. You know how I like to say that we historians should be rigorous and tell you when we're guessing, which is really what a surmise. Well, it's an educated guess at least, isn't it? Hopefully. Not always. But it's wonderful to see these names, and it's great to have this level of detail, but this is limited. I never knew who J. Merritt was. People who have followed me, if you've seen our excellent Where is Our Historian series, I talk a lot about the maps that I use to interpret the sites that I'm on. And what happened is in 1854, the Canal Company had a bunch of maps made, and they were put in map books like this. This is in our collection. There were two sets of them. So we are lucky enough to own one copy of this map book. These maps are now in an archive in Canada because in 1990, in a bankruptcy sale, Canadian Pacific Railroad bought the entire D&H. And unfortunately, these maps went there. The DHTHC, the Delaware and Hudson Transportation Heritage Council, of which I'm currently president and a proud member, managed to eventually get digital copies of these maps, and they're just wonderful. They're a source of amazing information. It's because of that map that I now know that my lovely wife Kelly and I live in the house of Jeremiah Merritt. And I have since discovered Jeremiah Merritt in the 1858 court case testimony. He actually spent at least a season on the canal. But now I have somebody I've learned about when he got married. I'm learning more about Jeremiah and the house we live in because of these wonderful maps. And I guess that's part of why I love maps so much. But these are really amazing. I really wish we could get the originals. I would love to have the originals. Now we got to be careful. This is only sitting up. You know, this worked fine before. The binding. This will get to conservation eventually. I knew I should have marked my pages. So I'm going to be very careful. So these map books, there's a set of two. Some are better colored than others. The second set, we believe, and I'm pretty sure that this is from the second map set. I'd really love eventually to have copies of both sets, because when I do get the color ones, they're just gorgeous. We'd love to be able to share these more with people. We have a very restricted license. But this is great. Yankee Pond, and this is Wolf Pond. Wolf Lake and Yankee Lake were connected. They're lakes today. There were ponds in the historic era. The D&H owned over 25 reservoirs to keep their canal watered, and they would make them deeper. They would improve them. Oh, look, Mom and Dad are here in real time. I'm honored. I thought I was a dinner thing.
It's about to do it again. Hang on, people. Camera issues.
Oh, well, you know, I'm going to have to learn how to program that into
There we
Facebook
go.
Live this week.
go.
I keep saying I'm going to do it. So I'm going to circle just one more, and I'm sorry I took my gloves off and I couldn't get the page. But this is really, you Ulster County locals, take a look right here. Long Pond. Anybody know of it? Probably not, because you would know it as Lake Awasting. Long Pond in the historic era. It feeds the Peterskill. The D&H Canal Company had to own Long Pond, now Lake Awasting, because they took water out of it virtually at the other end of the Peterskill, just before it terminates at the Rondout Creek. There will be a coming, Where is Our Historian, at the Peterskill Aqueduct, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is another instance of stories, things you learn because you have these maps. These are a wonderful resource. We're very lucky to have the digital copies. And any of my DHTHC colleagues, I would want to point out to you that I have just in the last 2 months taken these big maps, some of them only cover 1 or 2 square miles, and I've stitched them together. So I took 80 maps and I think I'm down to 20, so that I can more easily follow a route and figure out what is really what. And I will share that with any of the DHTHC members. Hopefully we'll get to meet in July. We'll be wearing masks still. But this is a wonderful resource. I'm going to leave it there, and when we're all done, I'll carefully put it back in its box. It's only out to show you, good folks. By the way, as I walk to the other end of the chapel, this is an 1883 Episcopal chapel built on a quarry site. I don't know whether this is local Shogun conglomerate or whether it's actually a cement mine. Steve Shimmerich, on the board of the Century House Historical, I'll have to get him. He's a geologist that teaches at SUNY Ulster. I'll have to get him to look at the stone here and tell me what it is. Maybe he's even there, I don't know. But so this is a 1885 chapel, Episcopal chapel that we were fortunate enough to have. We hold our lecture series in here, our board meetings.
Got it.
Yeah, this will make me.
It's almost like the battery is
The battery's fine.
yeah.
Yeah, it's charged up. We got
Hang
all
on,
day.
people. Okay.
So I'm going to walk over this way, but I won't let you see it. I don't know what is what. Do I have a good side? I don't know. But let's take ourselves over here. I can take my gloves off for now until it's time to handle. Until I'm off the air. In 2018, Suzanne Hotspur, the excellent administrative director of the Ulster County Historical Society, contacted my organization, the Canal Society, and yeah, you know, every time we do this, we have a new problem. Let me just try one thing, folks. Give me 1 second. I just want to see if it's just the weight. Let's move it down a little bit. It could just be as simple as physics.
Okay. Physics.
Physics.
Blah.
I love
Blah. Sorry.
You know, try to avoid it, people, but it's like gravity. Gravity, fascinating. We know it exists. Nobody can tell you how it works. Yeah. So the Ulster County Historical Society called me, and they had stuff that had been donated to them that they thought was more appropriate to us. So what we're looking at right here is this wonderful map on, I believe, silk, which was a common thing to do. And we'll start up here on the top. It was drawn in 1872, or at least added to in 1872 by a D. Westbrook surveyor. It's the map accompanying an application of the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company for a water grant. You know, when I first saw this, I'm thinking water grant, so the rights to run a mill. But in fact, what I believe the water grant they wanted was the right to park their boats. But so what did I learn from here? There's a bigger map and a smaller one. Well, we'll start with the smaller one here. Here is Island Dock right here. Notice it had 2 loading keys and a slip all the way through. I always say Island Dock, a little sandbar that the D&H cut this channel through. Nice to have a map to point it out this time. This used to be just like this, and then they cut that through and built all this. I'm told that they were putting pilings 40 foot down to support the buildings. I'm reading a book right now where, in fact, pilings, historically, most of Venice is on pilings. Wood driven down, pointy end first, into the ground until it stops, and then it'll be solid. The Canal Company, but the interesting thing that I never knew is the Canal Company owned Kingston Point, and this map was for them to get rights to park their boats at Kingston Point. And now we're gonna, it's harder to see there. Let's zoom out a little bit. So it's not the weight, it's just for some reason, sometimes it wants to see it and sometimes it doesn't. It seems to catch itself again.
Okay.
We promised to get this worked out this
other
week.
side?
It's time. You think I should get this side? Huh?
Yeah.
So we come over here and you can see this big long dock here. There's sections here. There's an awful lot of writing, a lot to study and a lot to learn about. And this isn't usually hung like this. I simply put this up very carefully so that I could show this to you. But I had no idea that Kingston Point was owned by the Canal Company, and it was they who sold it then to Samuel Kirkendall in 1893 or 4, and Kirkendall put Kingston Point Amusement Park there. Remember, the D&H started doing amusement park type stuff, and it kind of caught on at that point. People were starting to take vacations, and there you have it. The techie in me keeps wanting to fix the gimbal. All right, I've got to stop. I got to concentrate on what we're doing here, folks. So the Kingston Point Park was put here, but in the way that maps tell stories,
Good
one of the maps that we got had this. This will be hard to see. It's a bunch of streets and layouts. This was a proposed bunch of buildings on Kingston Point. I'm reasonably certain, besides the buildings that exist on this map, that the rest of these plots were never turned into buildings or building lots, even though you can see all the different building lots. And in fact, virtually none of that is there anymore. Who would think being the camera person would be so
stressful?
It's a very inexpensive gimbal. Maybe that's the problem, huh? But so here's a map that tells us about something that didn't happen, but clearly somebody wanted to develop it. That this would have been in Kingston Point. Where am I looking here? Right up in here. And in fact, you can see the same streets laid out, and that's part of how I figured out that this was a detail map. But as I say, to my knowledge, besides the buildings that are on here, those lots were never sold until Kirkendall bought it to build Kingston Point. Gumar Island, I don't think that we hit Gumar Island. Is that even on here? Nice question. I'll have to look that up, Judy. I'll have to look that up at some point. So in a similar way that you have maps of things that didn't occur, we're now going to work our way over here. All right, I'm going to change the order. You know, you compare and then you decide.
Okay, you ready?
Yep. I discovered this map in our archives when I started digging around about a decade ago. And it's a map of the village of Bloomingdale. Huh? We've got a Bloomington. There's no Bloomingdale. There's a few clues to us Canalers. We've got the Cuddyback Farm and Hardenberg Farm. Boy, Hardenberg Farm and Hardenberg Basin. And I can locate that on the 1854 maps. Water privileges. There was a mill here. In fact, there's your mill race. But over here, you'll see this was a map by John Kiersted.
Sorry, people, hang on.
Yeah, we've got a gimbal malfunction.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird.
You also have a question, I think.
Oh, I do. Yeah. Oh yes, Lock 31. Wonderful. Now Lock 31. That's where that's the park you're probably working on. They're going to have a pavilion based on plans of a canal boat. Sally Talega, I shout out to Sally. She's doing wonderful work with the Wayne County Historical Society. Yes, I'll have to do a Where is Our Historian at Lock 31 when I can get down south. But getting back to this map, Kiersted, is Chester here? Chester, don't we have a map of Saugerties by John Kiersted? 1836, showing the water privileges of the fall of 29 feet. Well, this is by the Rock Locks and Lefevre Falls. But what this actually is, I have from Russell Farnham Lord's journal a letter from a lawyer by the name. So this property was owned by a Mr. Sudum, John Sudum, who had passed on. So his widow and another very famous lawyer of the period, John Ostrander, they're trying to sell this town to people. And I believe they wanted some $5,000 or $6,000 for it. My letter's from 1851. This map is from 1836. They spent 15 years trying to get somebody to build this. This never got built. This is another map of trying to entice people to do something that never happened. Another really interesting thing here, you Ulster County historian folks. Town of Hurley in Ulster County. Hurley, this far, this is Rosendale. But in fact, Rosendale was part of Hurley until sometime in the 19th century, clearly after 1836. I don't know the exact date. Perhaps somebody out there will chime in. But then, as we move along, you're all going to get dizzy, folks.
That's just the camera.
I've got 3 more maps to show you today. This is just a fairly rare map. I've only seen one other copy in the collection of the Ulster County Historical Society. This is an I've forgotten the year already, but it'll tell me. 1839 map of Ulster County. This one needs to be deacidified. That's why it's so brown. But my favorite little thing gleaned out of here is, if we zero in here, Yeah, there's Rosedale. Oh, there it is, Stony Ridge. The contemporary town of Stone Ridge was known in 1839 as Stony Ridge, all part of Marbletown, where the town of High Falls is also part. Well, High Falls is both part of Marbletown and part of Rosendale. Funny how who decides these things? How does this stuff happen? Wonderful map. And as I say, I just sort of love maps, don't I? So now let's see, what shall we talk about next? I've got 2 more maps to show you. I have to put these nice frame pieces out of them. Oh, and the big reveal. This is another map on silk. And this map came with the 2 other maps on silk that I showed you of Kingston Point Park. And this is once again Kingston Point Park, but this map of the proposed located line of the Ulster and Delaware Railroad near Kingston Point. Seeing if we've got a year on this. So Kirkendall, this has got to be from the Kirkendall era because he had to own Kingston Point. But what it is you'll see this red line is all landfill. And if you go to Kingston Point Park, you can hike this all the way into Rondout on the other end. But this did not exist until they got the permission. The Ulster and Delaware Railroad eventually goes over to Kingston Point Park. Kirkendall owns that, and it goes right up into the mountains, into the Catskill Mountains, where Kirkendall and his father-in-law, Thomas Cornell, had one of the many mountain houses that were so prevalent in the latter part of the 19th century, especially up in the Hudson Valley. We live in such a historic and beautiful area. And by the latter part of the 19th century, when people started having vacations. But this is fascinating. They had to get permission to build this. And indeed, obviously, they got the permission. This map would have been used to get that. But I always like to save the best to last. And so here we go. Boy, I thought I'd take longer on this, didn't I? This map to me is like the Magna Carta. This is like the founding document of the D&H Canal.
Judy had a question about local map maker or outside map maker 1839 for this one also.
We don't have the name of the map maker on that, but the other guys, I'm assuming they were local guys. You know, there was a lot of work for them. This is not signed, but it's much later than the 57 map, who we have the name on. I can care if I don't have my gloves on to check I go and look on the back. There was no map maker information. It's my memory that. Yeah, no, I know that. Yes, unfortunately, presumably a local guy. I don't think they were itinerant like some other trades. But something to look up. And sometimes you have maps that don't have enough information. We don't have the name of the person who drew it, but it's clearly a well drawn. They're really works of art as well as interesting and important informational documents. Why they wind up in archives. I should point out, when I mentioned those 1854 maps, the DHTHC and the Canal Society are making a Google map of the entire route of the D&H Canal. In it, I'm putting call-outs of then and now pictures where I have them. We're listing every publicly accessible spot where you can hike and see D&H remains. Those 1854 maps have been vital for me to really learn the stories. I'll be studying those maps the rest of my life. It's why I put them all online. That map will be going live before the month is out on our new website, canalmuseum.org. It'll be a work in progress, so you'll see it change as it goes along. And as we release each of our Where is Our Historian videos, they'll be linked to the location that they were shot in. So this is going to be a really fun resource. I think it'll be a way for people who want to combine getting exercise and hiking with history. I know I love to. I always like to say part of why I got so interested in this history was because it's palpable. You can see parts of it today. I suppose it doesn't hurt that I also live in the house of a canaler. But it's a fascinating thing. It's really rewarding that we're uncovering so many, we're correcting the secondary sources in many instances, that one can have so much, that you can still uncover so much to this day is just really fascinating.
William Warnock is very excited to review the maps.
Yes, the thing with the 1854 maps is we have a really restrictive license, but you can visit me and I can show them to you. You're not supposed to take pictures. I think this is unenforceable, people. We will probably use them in our new museum because they're really wonderfully detailed. And I certainly can go over, I do research for people, I try and find, while I was shooting Where is Our Historian, I'm going to forget the gentleman's name, but the people living at Cornelius Foley's Lock House came out and saw me and we discussed a little bit and we communicated via email. I'm always available for any of your D&H questions, historian@canalmuseum.org. If I don't know it, I'll find somebody who does, or I'll look it up my own self, if I can. There's the stuff you know, and there's the stuff you may never know, right? And winding up for today's Sunday afternoon with our historian, this is an 1824 map engraved by, I'm going to take my glasses off now. Well, I still can't read that. A Philadelphia map maker. Good to know, Judy. This guy's from out of town. Philadelphia, though, coincidentally, the adoptive hometown at the time of the Wirtz brothers, because they had a dry goods store there, and at this point in time, they probably still were operating that business. Although Morris Wirtz goes over to working for the D&H immediately when they get the money. And that's what this map is for. This map was given to investors so that to show them what they had in mind. But there's some fascinating stuff here. We're going to start up here. The Kingston route. You know, when people found out the D&H Canal was going to be dug, the town fathers of Newburgh, right down here, spelled N-E-W-B-E-R-G at the time. That's not how we spell it today. They wanted the canal to terminate there, but this map is wonderful. There you go, the Shawangum Mountains. That was the reason it couldn't happen. Well, the businessmen of Kingston proper, uptown Kingston, up the hill from Rondout, they wanted the canal to come straight through town. So the canal route is accurate from Port Jervis all the way to about here, and then it peters out. Well, in the end, so even High Falls wasn't on the map at that point. And you know, there was nobody living here that was going to invest in the canal company, but there were people living there and there. I've always thought to some degree they actually did a survey to Newburgh, and I think it was partially just to get people's money, to get them to invest. But this term, or I should say, culminates in them oversubscribing their stock when they opened the stock books on January 8th of 1825 at the Tontine Coffee House. But there's another little bit about this. So none of that. We don't have the route they use there. They originally were going to just put all their traffic out on the Delaware River with a series of dams. But in their very first annual report, they make the wise decision, although difficult, to actually build a canal all along the Delaware River instead. Given the trouble they had with the raftsmen with the one dam, a series of dams would have just been a nightmare. But the other really fascinating thing is, let's look at Pennsylvania. Where's the canal? The canal company never announced a route in Pennsylvania. In fact, the canal company has the canal entirely built from Port Jervis all the way to Rondout by the end of 1827, and they are training lock tenders and moving material. They build a turnpike road to connect with another turnpike road so that they can get from Carbondale, I'm going to find you Carbondale, get to Carbondale to get their product to right here, Port Jervis. See, it's not even Port Jervis, it's Carpenter's Point at this point. And they did ship some coal to Tidewater to sell in 1827, but they even say in their annual report, they didn't have any surveys done in Pennsylvania. They didn't announce a thing until the final year. And it's clear that they were afraid that people were going to gouge them. They were afraid, especially since they had built that much of a canal, that people would want unreasonable amounts of money. And so they play it close to the vest. They don't announce any route. So the entire Pennsylvania stretch, the 34 locks, and the entire canal running along the Lackawaxen River was constructed that final year of 1828. And the other fun part of this story is that they were running out of money, and they get a $500,000 bond issue from the state of New York. And what do they do with that money? They build the rest of the canal in Pennsylvania. But you know, it wasn't going to be worth anything if it didn't get from the mines of in Carbondale to New York City, which isn't even on this map. But this is a wonderful.
William wants to know, Benjamin Wright, wasn't he the designer surveyor?
Benjamin Wright was absolutely right. He was the chief engineer of the Erie Canal, Judge Wright. All these men were self-taught. There was no schools of civil engineering except for West Point, which didn't concern itself with these sorts of internal improvements. Benjamin Wright was hired by the canal company, but by 1824, and so this map was to some degree based on work, but he didn't actually do the survey. John Sullivan and a Colonel Mills did the survey under Judge Wright's supervision. John Jervis and James McEntee come from Western New York, having trained on the Erie Canal under Benjamin Wright. Well, by 1827, Benjamin Wright's gone, and John Jervis takes over as chief engineer and finishes the job, designs the gravity railroad, the innovative gravity railroad, and a lot of the different infrastructure that was originally along the route of the canal. But you're absolutely right, it was Benjamin Wright, but anybody digging a ditch hired that guy. He also, he wasn't the nicest of men. If anybody reads, there's a wonderful book about John Rendell, the man who laid out Manhattan Grid in like the 18 teens. He ran afoul of Benjamin Wright, and Benjamin Wright did everything he could. He was horrible, that man. And meanwhile, the work that Rendell did was amazing. They don't implement it until 3/4 of a century later. Fascinating story. There's a great book, the name of which won't pop out of my head because it's not a canal book, about the measure of Manhattan. Maybe that's what it was called. At any rate, a wonderful book about John Rendell, the surveyor. But he unfortunately ran afoul of Benjamin Wright. And Benjamin Wright really went after him. Made his life very difficult. Makes you, well, we're all human beings. There's one final note, since we're talking about this kind of thing. There's a wonderful source, the Minisink Valley Historical Society sells the history, John Johnson's History of the Minisink Valley. And he talks about the people who built the canal and what happened. Oh, Courtney, how you doing? Courtney is watching us today. Courtney's our curatorial assistant, and she's my video editor. She's doing a wonderful job editing both the Where Is Our Historian and our virtual museum footage. We couldn't do it without her. But I think
Sorry.
I promise this week I'm going to get on that one, people. But why did it work all the other times?
I don't know.
Right? At any rate, wonderful to have you here. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, and I hope you'll join me again next week. I believe next week I'll probably show you some of the art and maps by Mandel Wakefield, founding member of this museum, Sullivan County historian, wrote the book Coal Boats to Tidewater. We have most of his research papers and a lot of his artwork, and I think next week I'll just show you Mandel Wakefield's artwork about the D&H Canal. See you all then.